I almost didn't want to share this because, honestly, it's pretty messed up. And I've been trying to forget about it. But I figured maybe if I talk about it, they'll help me get it out of my head. So here it goes. I met Martin on Tinder, and at first it seemed pretty normal. I mean, I'm not a newbie to the whole online dating thing, and I've talked to a lot of weirdos in my time, but this one stood out for all the wrong reasons. You know how it goes: swipe right if the person looks halfway decent, and then you start chatting to see if they're actually cool or just another person with weird pics and no personality. Martin was the first type. His profile was pretty basic, looking for someone real, not into games. Typical stuff, right? But his pics, they weren't bad. He looked like a guy I might run into at the grocery store. Nothing too fancy, just an average dude. At first, the conversation was fine. Pretty chill, just small talk. He'd send those "how's your day?" messages, and I'd answer back, and we'd talk a bit about work or what we were watching on Netflix. He seemed normal at first, but the more we chatted, the more things started to feel a little off. He'd ask about random stuff like what my favorite food was, and then followed up with something totally weird like, "Would you make me dinner if we ever met up?" I laughed it off at first. Maybe he was just joking around. But then it kept happening. He'd ask stuff like that, along with comments like, "I bet you're one of those girls who's really good at cooking, huh?" I didn't think much of it at first, but it started to bug me. He started getting more personal too, asking about exes, whether I was the type to have long-term relationships or just a fling. He'd comment on my pictures in a weird way, like, "You look like someone who would enjoy being spoiled." It wasn't that it was creepy at first, but more like he was laying it on a bit thick, like he was trying to make me think I owed him something. And honestly, I didn't really want to give him my number. I had a bad vibe and I didn't want to waste my time on someone who felt off. But then, out of nowhere, he asked for my number. At first, I didn't want to give it to him, but he was persistent. I was trying to figure out what to say. And then he said something that honestly put me on edge. He asked if I wanted to meet up and hang out. Normally, I'd be down, but for some reason, this guy just didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to get myself in a weird situation, so I told him that I wasn't ready to meet yet. That's when everything went downhill. He flipped out. I mean, his entire attitude changed. He started saying stuff like, "I knew it. You're just like all the others. Too good to give a guy like me a chance." I was like, what the hell? Dude, we barely even talked. But he kept going. The insults got worse, and the more I tried to calm the conversation down, the nastier he got. And then he said something that totally threw me off. He told me, "You're just good for one thing anyway. Go back to the kitchen and make me a tea and sandwich because that's all you're good for." At first, I thought it was some kind of weird joke, but the more I read the messages, the more I realized he was dead serious. My stomach dropped, and I just stared at the screen for a second, trying to process what I was reading. I couldn't believe this guy, who seemed so normal at first, had just turned into some sort of, well, I don't even know what to call it. I didn't even want to respond to him anymore, but part of me was still hoping he'd snap out of it and apologize. But no, he kept going. "You girls think you're all that, but deep down, you just want a guy to control you. Don't act like you don't. You'll be cooking my meals soon enough. You'll see." I was honestly at a loss for words. I had some pretty weird conversations with people online, but this was on a whole other level. The worst part, the guy just didn't let up. He kept sending more and more messages, each one nastier than the last. He started to talk about how women's only purpose was to serve men, like he genuinely believed that. I blocked him after that. I couldn't deal with it anymore, but even after blocking him, I was still shaken up. I kept thinking about how easily this guy had gone from being semi-normal to downright disturbing. I thought about how many other women he'd probably done this to and how many others might not have blocked him, but maybe just accepted it. Like, what if he'd said that to someone else and they thought they had to put up with it? Honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. And then, about a week later, I got a notification on Tinder. A message from Martin. I thought there was no way it could be him again. But it was. It was just as nasty as before. Something about how I was wasting my time on other guys when I should be serving him. I don't know how he made another profile, but I didn't care to investigate. I blocked him again. This time, I reported his account. But what really stuck with me was how quickly his entire persona changed. The weird thing is that, in the beginning, he seemed so normal. I mean, this could happen to anyone. But after that, I couldn't stop thinking about how dangerous it can be to meet people online. You think you know them, but you really don't. So yeah, that's my story. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened if I'd agreed to meet up with him. I don't even want to think about it. Just be careful out there, guys. Trust your gut. This one still messes with my head every time I think about it. I honestly can't believe it happened, but I need to get it off my chest because it feels like I'm the only one who knows the truth. It's not a truth anyone else should find out the way I did. So, it's this dating app I heard about called Blind Date. It's a little different than most. The catch is you can't see the other person until you meet. You just talk, build some chemistry, and make plans to meet up. At first, it sounded kind of cool to me, like a way to get to know someone without being distracted by looks or photos. It's just about connecting as people. I was kind of skeptical, but I decided to try it out. I set up my profile and waited. After a few days of scrolling through people and sending messages, I got a match. Her name was Est. She was a little older than me, but not by too much. She said she was in her 40s and I was 25 at the time. I thought that was a bit of an age gap, but she seemed cool. She was fun to talk to, easygoing, witty, and shared a lot of the same interests as me. We got into conversations about everything from movies to food to family life. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The weird thing, though, was that she never gave me her full name. She kept saying it was too soon for that. I thought that was strange, but didn't really press it. She told me that when we met, I'd get to know everything about her. I'm not exactly a suspicious person, so I just brushed it off and thought, whatever, maybe she's just shy or a little private. So after chatting for a couple of weeks, we finally agreed to meet up. We decided on a small coffee shop downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet place where we could talk. The day of the meeting, I was feeling a bit nervous, but also curious. I kept imagining who she might be in person, and I even wondered if I'd recognize her once we were face to face. I mean, I'd never seen her photo, so it felt like kind of a weird gamble. I got there a little early and waited at the table. I kept checking my phone, making sure I didn't miss any text from her. I could feel the anxiety building up, and I kept telling myself to relax. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. I'm here, come outside. I stood up, walked up to the front of the cafe, and that's when I saw her. I'm not sure what I expected, but the moment I saw her, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it hit me as soon as I saw her standing there. It was like I knew her, but I couldn't place where or how. She was in a beige coat with her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She was holding a coffee cup, looking at me with a polite but kind of expectant smile. As I got closer, I felt the strangest sense of recognition, like something was about to hit me, but I couldn't quite get it. I said hi, and she smiled warmly. She seemed nice enough, but there was still something in the back of my mind that was bugging me. We went inside, sat down, and started chatting. The conversation felt normal, but I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. It was almost like I had seen her face before, somewhere, somehow. I started focusing more on the details of her face, trying to place it. She had these familiar eyes, the way her eyebrows arched, the curve of her smile. It was also unsettlingly familiar, but where had I seen it before? I tried to push it aside and focus on the conversation. She told me that she had 2 kids and had recently gotten divorced. She said she was looking for someone to connect with, someone who wasn't like all the others. I thought she meant her ex-husband, and we started talking about relationships and the challenges of dating at an older age. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. She said something about her kids being at their dad's for the weekend, and I almost froze. I hadn't really processed it at first, but suddenly everything clicked. Her voice, her mannerisms, the way she held herself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at her, and it took me a second to gather myself. But I had to ask. It was burning in the back of my mind, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I asked her, "Wait, are you my mom?" She froze for a second, just a brief pause, but long enough for me to confirm what I already knew. Her face went blank, and she didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. The whole place felt like it went silent, even though it was busy with other people talking and laughing. Her expression shifted, and she gave me a look. It wasn't the kind of look I was expecting from a stranger. It was a look that only a mother could give. The kind of look that made me feel like I was suffocating. Then she finally spoke, but it wasn't the answer I wanted. She said nothing about the truth. Instead, she just sat there and stared at me for a long moment, not saying a word. I didn't know if I should stand up, scream, or just walk away, but I was too stunned to do anything. I could feel my hands shaking, and my heart was pounding in my chest. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. But then she did something even worse. She tried to play it off like it was no big deal. She made some lame excuse about how she had been looking for something more exciting in her life and wanted to reconnect with someone younger. She didn't even look embarrassed. It was like she was more concerned about her secret than the fact that I had just found out who she really was. I stood up, but my legs felt like jelly. I didn't even know how to process what had just happened. My mother cheating on my dad and meeting me on a dating app like we were strangers. It didn't make any sense. I couldn't even look at her anymore. I just walked out of that cafe, feeling like the world had completely shifted beneath my feet. I was reeling. The whole thing felt like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I don't even know how I got home. My mind was racing. When I got home, I didn't tell my dad. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I still haven't told him. It feels like I'm stuck in some messed up game and I don't know what to do. But I had to share this because it was the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me. Finding my own mother on a dating app was bad enough, but finding out she was cheating on my dad, that was something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I still don't know if I'll ever confront her. I'm just trying to move on with my life, but every time I think about it, my heart sinks. And I know this is something I'll never forget. So let me tell you about this messed up experience I had with a girl I met on Hinge. I wasn't expecting anything crazy to happen, but man, looking back, I honestly can't believe how naive I was. This one takes the cake for being one of the weirdest and most unsettling things I've ever been through. It all started in my match with Sandra on Hinge. She seemed really cool at first, way out of my league, honestly, but she was nice, funny, and had this vibe like she was down to earth. Her profile was all about fashion, traveling, and living that I'm too cool for school lifestyle. I was into it. She had these super professional looking pictures where she was posing on beaches, sitting on fancy couches in nice places, wearing these high end clothes I couldn't even pronounce the names of. She had that model vibe, but I didn't think much of it. I figured she might be one of those girls who had a side hustle in the fashion world, posting stuff for brands or whatever. We started chatting pretty regularly, nothing out of the ordinary. She'd tell me about her trips, how she loved taking photos, and about her exclusive content that she was trying to build up. At first, I didn't think much of it, but eventually she mentioned that she'd started an OnlyFans account. Don't judge me. I know it's a thing and I didn't think it was a big deal. She even told me she was just getting started and was looking for people to support her content. Honestly, I didn't even blink an eye. I'm not dumb. I get that people do all kinds of things for money, and if she was trying to make it in the influencer world, whatever. Then one day, out of nowhere, she asked me for money. Well, not straight up, but it was clear that's where the conversation was headed. She said she had some special content I could access if I sent her a little support, and I thought, okay, this is weird, but I'll be honest. I was kind of flattered that she was asking me. She said it was exclusive stuff, not the usual Instagram posts, and it would only be available to a few VIP supporters. At first, I was hesitant. I mean, I'm not stupid enough to just throw money at some random person I barely know, but she was really persistent, saying it'd help her grow her brand and that she was grateful for any help. I started to feel a little bad for her, like maybe this was her way of getting a start in a tough world, and she seemed genuine. So I thought, why not? Maybe I'd see what the hype was about. I was literally on the verge of sending her some money when something really odd happened. I was at my buddy's place. We were hanging out and playing video games like we always do when I showed him Sandra's profile. I thought it was funny, and I wanted his opinion, especially since I had this weird feeling in the back of my head that something wasn't quite right. He took one look at her pictures and froze. He wasn't saying anything, just staring at the screen, and I could tell something was off. So I asked him, "What's up, dude? You good?" He just shook his head, put down his controller, and said, "Bro, that's a famous Russian model." I didn't even know how to react. I laughed thinking he was just joking around, but he was dead serious. He told me to Google her name, and when I did, my stomach sank. I found the same exact pictures, only they weren't hers. It wasn't just some random influencer. It was a model that was all over the place. There were interviews, magazine covers, everything. I was looking at the same person I had been talking to on Hinge. Only, it wasn't her. I started to feel really stupid. Like, how could I not have noticed? How did I fall for this? But the more I looked into it, the worse it got. I started Googling more about her and found that people had been scammed by fake profiles of models like this all the time. They'd set up a fake identity, use stolen photos, and then trick people into giving them money for nothing. Some people even went as far as to build fake relationships and manipulate their victims into thinking they were actually going to meet up. But in reality, they were just after cash. I went through every single message Sandra had sent me, trying to find the red flags I'd missed. I was embarrassed to admit it, but I was pretty close to sending her money. I mean, she'd even started calling me babe and sending sweet messages about how she couldn't wait for us to meet up. The whole thing was building out like a weird romance, and I was genuinely starting to like her. But then I realized none of it was real. I felt so gross. I couldn't believe that I was about to send money to someone who wasn't even real. It was like being in a bad movie where the main character just keeps digging themselves deeper into a hole they can't get out of. And I almost didn't see it in time. I blocked her immediately. But even then, I didn't feel safe. What if she had my personal info? What if she had other profiles out there trying to scam more people? I wasn't sure what to do next. I reported the profile on Hinge, but at that point, I wasn't really sure it would do anything. I thought about reaching out to the actual model whose pictures were being used, but I didn't know where to start. It's not like I wanted to get involved in some international scam investigation or anything. Honestly, though, the most messed up part was how real everything felt. She was so convincing, so sweet at times, and the way she played the game made me feel like I was talking to someone real. I even convinced myself that I might be able to meet her one day, like this wasn't some weird online fantasy. I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling of realizing I almost got taken for a ride. The whole thing was so calculated, so manipulative, and I could tell that this was just one small piece of a bigger scam. It made me realize how much you can fake online, how easy it is to build a persona that doesn't even exist. And that was honestly terrifying. So yeah, lesson learned, I guess. Be careful who you trust on dating apps, especially when they seem too perfect to be true. Okay, so I'm not sure if I even want to share this because it still kind of freaks me out every time I think about it. But I guess that's why I'm doing it. Maybe getting it off my chest will make it feel less real. Anyway, this happened a few months ago, and I hadn't really told anyone about it. But after everything that went down, I think it's worth sharing. So I met this guy, Philip, on Bumble. We'd been chatting for about a week, and honestly, he seemed pretty cool. His profile was a little vague, just a couple of selfies with some basic stuff about liking movies, hiking, and going to concerts. Nothing too crazy. We talked a lot about books and the kind of music we were into, and he seemed chill enough, though a little on the shy side, which I didn't think much of. I'm kind of an introvert myself, so it didn't raise any flags. He asked if I wanted to meet up at a cafe near my place, which sounded fine to me. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I wasn't doing anything else, so why not? I agreed, and we set up a time for around 3 p.m. I showed up a few minutes early, just so I could grab a coffee and have a little time to settle in. The cafe was cute, not too crowded, but still a good spot for a first date. I didn't expect fireworks or anything. I was just hoping for a nice conversation and maybe get to know him a little better. When he walked in, I noticed him immediately. He was a bit taller than I expected, but not much. He looked pretty nervous, like he was already sweating a little even though it wasn't hot. I stood up and waved, and he gave me a shy smile, which was fine. I'm not a big fan of awkward first dates, but I figured it was normal. We hugged when he got close, nothing weird, just a quick, friendly hug. But then it got weird. He didn't let go. At first, I thought maybe he was just holding on a little longer than usual, like maybe he was shy or nervous, and I didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable, so I didn't pull away immediately. But as the seconds went on, he just held on, like he wasn't planning on letting go anytime soon. I started to feel like something was off. I was trying to pull away a little, but his arms stayed locked around me. I didn't know how to handle it. I tried to subtly step back, but he tightened his grip. I kept telling myself, okay, this is just a weird thing. He's shy, it'll pass. But it didn't. The more I tried to pull away, the tighter his hug got, and I could feel his body getting more rigid, like he wasn't even trying to be subtle about it anymore. The awkwardness went from mildly uncomfortable to really uncomfortable. At that point, I was genuinely freaked out. I mean, how long can you stand there, half hugging someone, before it just feels like they're holding you hostage? I started feeling panicked. My chest was getting tight, and I couldn't focus. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't sure how to make it clear that I wasn't okay with this. I'm not the confrontational type, and I didn't want to cause a scene in front of everyone else in the cafe, but it was clear this wasn't just a nervous hug anymore. I gently said his name and tried to move back again, but instead of loosening his grip, he just pulled me closer. I could feel my stomach flip as I started to panic a little more. My mind was racing. I was trapped in this weird situation with a guy I barely knew, and he wouldn't let me go. My brain started screaming, what the hell is happening right now? I finally managed to push him off. I wasn't even thinking, I just kind of shoved him back with both hands on his chest. He didn't resist, but he looked a little surprised, almost hurt, like I had just slapped him. But that was honestly the least of my concerns at that point. I just wanted to get out of there. I backed away, apologized, though I wasn't sure why I was apologizing, and started grabbing my things. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I just couldn't stay there anymore. I don't even remember how I got my coat on or grabbed my purse, but I made a beeline for the door without looking back. It was like all my instincts were telling me to get as far away from him as possible. I could still feel the tightness of his arms around me, even though I was already out the door. I don't know how long I stood on the sidewalk, trying to calm myself down, but I knew I couldn't go back to that cafe. I texted a friend immediately, telling them what had just happened. The rest of the day was a blur. I didn't want to go home just yet, so I went for a walk to try and shake the weird feeling off. But I couldn't stop thinking about the whole thing. Was I overreacting? Was I just being paranoid? But no, it didn't feel like that. It felt like he was, I don't even know, possessive. Like something in him clicked when I tried to pull away and he didn't want to let go, and it freaked me out. I ended up talking to a couple of my friends about it later that evening, and they all agreed that it was super odd. I mean, they'd been on plenty of first dates, and none of them had experienced anything remotely like that. One of my friends even mentioned that maybe I dodged a bullet. That really stuck with me. What if I had stayed longer? What if I hadn't pushed him off? What would have happened if I hadn't reacted the way I did? The worst part? After I left, Philip texted me a couple of times. The first one was just, sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I'm just a little shy sometimes. And then another one, I hope I didn't freak you out. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I blocked his number and deleted his profile. The whole thing was just too weird, and honestly, it left me feeling really unsettled. So, yeah, that's the story. I know it probably seems like not much happened, but to me, it felt like a close call. I've been on enough dates to know when something's off, and trust me, that was way off. Alright, so I've been debating whether or not to share this for a while, but I figure it might help someone avoid the same weird, borderline creepy situation I found myself in. I can laugh about it now, but trust me, back then I was absolutely freaking out. I met Mason on Tinder. He seemed normal at first, pretty cute, around my age, into hiking, dogs, and low-key stuff like cooking and reading. His profile wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but it was enough to catch my interest. We had a few back and forths on the app, nothing super deep, but light and fun, and I agreed to meet up for coffee one afternoon. It wasn't anything fancy, just a regular first date, right? Yeah, well, turns out I couldn't have been more wrong. When we met, I'll be honest, he seemed exactly like his pictures. Nice smile, good height, dressed casually. But from the second I saw him, I started feeling this weird, uncomfortable vibe. It was like off, but I didn't want to judge him right away. I thought the guy was just being weird. I mean, who doesn't feel a little nervous before a date, right? So we sat down at the coffee shop, got our drinks, and started talking. The conversation was fine at first. He was polite, asked questions about my job, my hobbies, the usual. But then things started getting weird, like unsettling weird. Out of nowhere, he asked me about a dog I used to have, which I hadn't posted about in years. I mean years. I was taken aback. I didn't really know how to respond, because it was kind of personal, and I hadn't shared anything about my dog on social media or anything. So I just shrugged it off as a coincidence. Maybe he'd seen a picture of it somewhere, right? But then it got worse. As we talked, he started mentioning details about my life that I never ever told him, like the fact that I'd been on a trip to Florida last year, or that I liked a specific type of pizza that wasn't exactly common knowledge. And it wasn't like he was guessing or pulling this stuff out of thin air. He was very specific about it. I started getting a little freaked out trying to figure out how the hell he knew all this about me. I hadn't told him a thing about my trip to Florida. In fact, the only people who knew about it were my close friends and family. But somehow Mason knew. It wasn't just the little details. At one point, he brought up my old high school. He even mentioned my ex from there, and I hadn't talked to that guy in ages. How did he know all this? At this point, my anxiety was kicking in. I was trying to stay calm, but I couldn't shake this feeling that he was watching me, like he knew a lot more than he should. I casually tried to change the subject, but Mason just kept smiling this strange smile, like he knew exactly how to push my buttons. It wasn't the friendly kind of smile, though. It was more of a knowing smile. I didn't like it. My gut was telling me something wasn't right, but I didn't want to cause a scene or make him feel uncomfortable. The weirdness only escalated when he asked me if I wanted to go for a walk afterward. I agreed, mainly because I was trying to keep things light and normal. But the walk was awkward. He kept talking to me like we'd been friends for years, not strangers just meeting for the first time. And here's the thing, he kept referencing things about my life that no one but close people would know. Like when I was upset about losing a job a while back, or how I used to be really into painting. Stuff I barely told anyone. It wasn't just the conversations, though. He was acting possessive. The way he stood too close to me, the way he kept touching my arm when he talked, even though I hadn't invited that. I felt suffocated. He was just too much, you know. There was no personal space. When we got to the park, he even mentioned that he'd seen me around town before, which freaked me out even more. I never saw him around, but apparently he'd seen me a few times in places I frequented. How? Why? Was he following me? Or had he just been watching? Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, he asked me a question that really made my skin crawl. Hey, so, would it be okay if I stayed over at your place tonight? I'm really tired from the drive, and it's a long ride back. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I mean, we just met. It was one thing to meet up for coffee, but staying at my house. Are you kidding me? I laughed awkwardly at first, thinking maybe he was joking, but no. He was dead serious. He didn't seem embarrassed or awkward about it at all. It was like he expected me to say yes. I immediately tried to backtrack, saying something like, oh, I don't really have anyone over that quickly. But he didn't take the hint. He just smiled again and started talking about how it'd be fine, how we'd have a good time, maybe even watch a movie. He acted like this was a totally normal thing to suggest on a first date. But my mind was racing. Why would you think I'd be okay with that? Why would you even ask? By this point, I was absolutely on edge. My stomach was in knots, and I could feel myself getting more and more uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to just walk away and leave him standing there, but I definitely didn't want him to come home with me. So I made up some excuse about needing to head home early for a family thing, and I started walking away quickly. I didn't even look back. Mason didn't follow me, but I'm still not sure if that was because he realized I wasn't going to entertain his creepy behavior or if he was just playing it cool. Either way, I texted my friend as soon as I was a few blocks away, telling her everything. She didn't even say much, just you gotta block that guy. I did. I blocked him on Tinder and I never heard from him again. But I can't shake the feeling that he knew way too much about me. It still bothers me, honestly. I mean, how did he know all those details about my life? I didn't post half of that stuff online, and I sure as hell didn't tell him. In the end, I realized just how important it is to trust your gut. If something feels off, it usually is. I don't care if you've been talking to someone for weeks. Don't let them make you feel uncomfortable, especially if they're pushing boundaries. I'm just thankful I got away before things got even weirder. And I still can't get over how real this whole thing felt. But yeah, that was the most bizarre Tinder date I've ever been on. And I'm not in a hurry to go on another one anytime soon. I still can't believe this happened. I'm honestly still kind of shocked at how weird it got, and it's been a few months since it all went down. I figured I'd share it here because I can't be the only one who's had a Tinder date turn into a nightmare. So here's the story about Daniel, my super weird sushi date. I met Daniel on Tinder. Honestly, our conversations online were amazing. The chemistry was off the charts. We clicked instantly, talking about music, movies, travel, and just everything. He seemed like a pretty chill guy. He was funny, smart, and we seemed to have the same sense of humor. It was one of those moments when I thought, hey, this might actually go somewhere. We even joked about how easy the conversation was, like we already knew each other. So when he asked me out, I was excited. He suggested sushi, which I'm all about, and I agreed without thinking twice. The day of the date, I was ready. I put on something cute, did my hair, and was feeling good about it. I was actually kind of excited to finally meet this guy I've been chatting with. He picked me up from my apartment, and I walked outside to meet him. Now, up until this point, everything had been totally normal. He was punctual, the texting had been great, and I thought this is going to be a fun night. But the second I got in his car, things started to take a weird turn. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was off. Like there was this musky, stale, almost sour scent in the air. I thought maybe he just had a fast food drive-thru or something, but no. It was way worse than that. The car smelled like wet dog and just bad hygiene. I was too polite to say anything at first, thinking it was just a one-off thing. But as I got more settled in the seat, I noticed something even worse. There was dog poop. Yes, actual dog poop, right on the seat where I was supposed to sit. It was on the fabric, and it wasn't a small bit either. It was a decent-sized mess, clearly not cleaned up, and it was fresh. I just froze. I wasn't sure if I was in shock or if I was just trying to understand how this was real life. I mean, come on, how does someone go on a date and not even clean their car first? It wasn't like there was a little speck either. This was a full-on disaster. I tried to hold it together. Maybe he didn't realize it, right? Maybe his dog had an accident and he didn't notice it before picking me up. But then Daniel just casually says, yeah, Guppy had an accident earlier, but he's a poodle, so he's really chill about it. Don't worry, I'll clean it up later. Later, that was his excuse. I mean, come on. He was literally driving me around with fresh dog poop in his car and just didn't care. I was speechless. This was the point where I should have gotten out of the car, but instead I tried to be polite and said I'd just take the bus to the restaurant. I didn't want to make it awkward, but I couldn't deal with that smell or the fact that his dog's poop was chilling in the car. But instead of taking it in stride or just being like, oh, okay, Daniel got weirdly offended, like unreasonably offended. He actually started acting like I was the one who was overreacting. Even though I was the one sitting in a car that smelled like a kennel and had literal dog waste all over the seat. I repeated that I'd just take the bus, but he wouldn't have it. He started getting defensive, saying stuff like, it's just a little poop, come on. Guppy's a great dog, and honestly, all girls are the same, so picky over the smallest stuff. You don't even care about dogs, do you? They're way better than people. I was starting to realize that this was no longer a normal situation. I mean, I get that some people love their dogs, but there's a line, right? I wasn't being picky. I was just grossed out and didn't want to sit in a poop-covered seat. And then it got worse. He just drove off. He didn't even say goodbye or try to apologize for how weird everything had gotten. He just sped off, flipping me off as he did. Like it wasn't enough that I was weirded out by the situation, but now it was also getting this weird aggression thrown at me. As he drove away, he yelled something like, yeah, whatever. Dogs are better than any girl I've met anyway. You're all the same. It was honestly surreal. I stood there for a few seconds, processing what had just happened. He had literally picked me up, driven me to his car, let me sit in dog poop, and then flipped out because I didn't want to be part of it. The whole thing felt like it couldn't be real. Was I on some hidden camera show? Was this a joke? Because it felt like I had just gotten pumped. I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, my mind racing. I had no idea what just happened, but I was definitely not going to let it ruin my evening. I didn't even care about the sushi anymore. I just wanted to get away from this guy. I called an Uber, got in, and went home. The ride was so awkward and quiet, and I spent the whole time trying to process what had just happened. The worst part, after I got home, I checked my phone and saw a few texts from Daniel. They were all along the lines of him complaining about how girls are never grateful, and how I was just too much of a princess to handle a little dog mess. And the last one. It said, don't worry, I'll find someone who actually appreciates my dog, and not some girl who's too busy being high maintenance to care about the things that matter. I didn't respond, of course. I blocked him on Tinder and even blocked his number because I didn't want to hear any more of his weird rants. I couldn't believe how fast things escalated from, hey, let's grab some sushi to dogs are better than girls. So, yeah, that was my date with Daniel. Honestly, I don't know if it was the weirdest date I've had, but it's definitely up there. I'll never understand why anyone would think it's okay to drive around with dog poop in their car and not care. I definitely learned that no matter how good the chemistry seems online, you got to trust your instincts when you meet up in person. If something feels off, it probably is. In the end, I'm just glad I didn't end up having sushi with a guy who thinks dog poop is just part of the charm. Definitely not my type. Okay, so this is something I never thought I'd be writing about, but it definitely feels like I need to share it. I met Zayn on this Muslim dating app called Salons. I'd never really thought about online dating before, but I figured it couldn't hurt to try something new. I heard some of my friends talk about it, so I figured, why not? Zane seemed like a nice enough guy. His profile was pretty straightforward. He was polite, respectful, and had a good mix of humor and seriousness in his messages. We had a lot in common, talked about family, religion, and our goals in life. It felt natural, like we were building a friendship before even meeting in person. We chatted for a few weeks before deciding to meet up. Everything up until that point felt pretty normal. Honestly, I was kind of excited, but also a little nervous, like you always are before meeting someone new. I agreed to meet him at this quiet cafe in the city, a place where we could sit and talk without too much distraction. I thought it would be nice, a casual, easy first date. When I arrived, I texted him that I was there. He told me he'd be there in a few minutes. I waited, sipping on my coffee, trying to calm my nerves. And then he walked in. Zane was exactly like his pictures. Tall, wearing a simple but stylish outfit, and smiling as he walked toward me. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers, which was sweet. I thought, okay, this could be nice. We sat down, and the conversation started off easy. We talked about our families, our jobs, and the usual first date stuff. But then, after about 10 minutes, he did something that immediately made me feel uncomfortable. He said, my aunts and uncles are nearby. They were just curious to see who I was meeting. I thought it was a little odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it's a cultural thing. I don't know. I figured he was just being polite, and it would be fine. But then he said, would you mind if they came over to say hi? I was kind of thrown off. I mean, this was our first date. I didn't even know this guy that well. Why would I be meeting his family on a first date? But I didn't want to come off as rude or awkward, so I tried to brush it off and said it was fine. A few minutes later, his aunt and uncle walked in, both of them in their 40s, both very kind but very interested. They sat down at our table, and it wasn't just like a quick, hey, how are you? Exchange. They sat and started asking me questions about my life, my job, my hobbies, my family. I felt like I was on trial or something. I wasn't prepared for this. Dane sat there, watching me answer all these questions with his smile, almost like he was waiting for my approval from them or something. It was so awkward. And then it got worse. More of his family started showing up. His cousins, his uncle's wife. Basically, all of Zane's extended family came strolling in. At this point, I felt like I was in some kind of weird family reunion, not a first date. It was like I was suddenly on display for everyone to examine. I mean, who does that? Why would anyone bring their whole family to a date? It wasn't like they were just popping in to say hello, no. They were there, sitting at the table, taking part of the conversation, and making me feel like I was being interviewed. I could feel my face getting red, and my mind was just racing, trying to figure out what was going on. Was this normal for them? Was I overthinking it? But the longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I became. The whole thing felt so off. Zane didn't even seem to notice. He was just sitting there smiling at me, answering questions like everything was completely normal. Meanwhile, his family was discussing my background and my family's traditions. It felt like they were trying to map out my whole life story, all within 30 minutes. At this point, I was ready to leave. I hadn't even had a chance to talk to Zane in private, and it felt like I was being forced into a position where I had to impress his family on the first date. I wasn't even sure if Zane and I had real chemistry, because we were so busy talking about everything except us. I told him I needed to leave. He didn't seem to get it. Instead of understanding that I was feeling uncomfortable, he kept reassuring me that this was normal, that his family just wanted to know who he was meeting, and that this was the way it was done. I declined politely, saying that I wasn't feeling well and needed to head home. Zane tried to insist, but I stood up and said goodbye to everyone. His family was polite, but I could tell they were a little disappointed. As I walked out of the cafe, I was just shaking my head. I didn't know if I should be relieved or annoyed. It wasn't just a first date. It felt like I was auditioning for something I didn't even want to be a part of. Zane texted me as I was heading to my car. He said he was sorry his family made me uncomfortable and that they were just really excited to meet me. But honestly, I wasn't buying it. I don't care how excited your family is. I shouldn't have had to meet them on the first date. I blocked him after that. I know it might sound harsh, but I don't think he ever got it. To him, it probably seemed normal, but I didn't want to be with someone whose first instinct was to bring all their relatives along like it was a new product on a shelf they wanted to inspect. It wasn't fair to me, and I felt like my boundaries had been completely ignored. The whole experience left me feeling drained and confused. I mean, I get that family is important, but you don't bring your entire family to meet someone on the first date. That's just not how it works. Looking back, I don't think Sani was a bad person, but we definitely weren't on the same page, and that's okay. But I definitely learned the hard way that some things are better kept between two people until you really know each other. Meeting your partner's family that early, that's a red flag. So yeah, that was my weird and uncomfortable date with Zane. If there's anything I learned, it's that some cultural norms just don't vibe with me. And sometimes it's okay to walk away from something that feels off, even if everyone else thinks it's fine. Okay, I don't even know where to begin with this one. It was honestly one of the weirdest and most unsettling things that's ever happened to me. I'm still trying to figure out how it all went so wrong, but I guess I should start from the beginning. I met Juliana on Facebook. She messaged me out of the blue one day, saying she had seen my profile through some mutual friends and thought I seemed cool. She told me she was a refugee from Ukraine, that she'd been in the country for a little while, and that things had been tough for her. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone has a story, right? I'm not going to turn someone away just because they're going through a hard time, especially not someone who's been through what she had. So we started chatting. She seemed really sweet, and we quickly fell into an easy flow of conversation. She didn't ask for anything, just talked about her life back in Ukraine, how hard it was for her and her family, and how grateful she was to be safe here. She told me a lot about the war, how it had destroyed everything she knew, and I felt bad for her. She wasn't begging for help or anything, just sharing her story. I started feeling like I could maybe do something nice for her, like give her some comfort after everything she'd been through. After a few weeks of chatting, she suggested we meet up. She was in my city, and we decided to grab a coffee at a little cafe downtown. When I got there, I was nervous. I had never met anyone online, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I got there early, so I was just sitting around, people watching, and trying to calm myself down. I was wondering if maybe she would look different than how she did in her photos. But when she walked in, I recognized her right away. She was exactly how she looked in the pictures, maybe a little more tired, but still pretty. She smiled at me, and I waved. She walked over and immediately hugged me. Now, I'm a pretty touchy-feely person, but it threw me off a little. It was just a lot, you know. She had this intensity to her that I wasn't prepared for. I shrugged it off, though. People have different ways of saying hello, right? Maybe it was a cultural thing. We sat down, and she didn't waste any time. As soon as we got our drinks and sat down, she started talking. And I'm not talking about small talk or anything. No, it was straight to the point, and I wasn't ready for it. She looked at me with these big, intense eyes and said, "So, would you be willing to marry me tomorrow?" I stared at her, blinking, thinking I'd misheard her. She said it again. "I need to stay in the country, and I need someone to marry me. You seem like a good person. I'm not asking for anything more than that. Just a marriage on paper." I swear, I almost choked on my coffee. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like she had eased into the topic. There was no lead up, no gradual conversation about our feelings or compatibility. Just, "Hey, marry me tomorrow." I froze for a second, trying to wrap my head around it. I asked her why she needed to get married so quickly, and she went into this whole thing about her visa status. Apparently, she was on some temporary visa, and it was about to expire. If she didn't get married to someone from here, she'd have to go back to Ukraine, and she didn't want that. She said that she wasn't trying to scam me or anything, just needed a paper marriage so she could stay. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for helping people I can, but this was way over the line. Marrying someone because their visa is expiring. I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or terrified. I tried to let her down easy, telling her that I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, especially not after just meeting in person. I explained that I didn't think it was something I could do, that it didn't feel right to me. But as soon as I said no, things got strange. Her face went from warm and hopeful to almost angry. She immediately stood up, knocking over her cup in the process, and started pacing. It was like a switch flipped. She started ranting about how I was ruining her life, how I was the only one who could help her, and how all men were the same. She said I was just another selfish person who didn't care about the struggles of others. She went on and on about how I had a chance to be a hero, to help someone in need, and I was just turning it down like it was nothing. I wasn't expecting her to react like this at all. I thought she'd take it as a no, and maybe we'd awkwardly finish our coffee and part ways. But no, she was completely spiraling. She told me that if I didn't marry her, she'd be sent back to a war zone, and it would be all my fault. She wasn't even asking for money or anything, just this one thing. One simple thing in her eyes. I was starting to get uncomfortable. She was starting to get louder, and I was looking around, wondering if people were going to notice. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I didn't know what to do. I tried to calm her down, but it was clear she wasn't hearing anything I said. She just kept blaming me for her demise, and it was starting to feel really intense. I realized I had to leave. This wasn't going anywhere good, and I wasn't getting married to anyone, especially not under these circumstances. I stood up, excused myself, and started walking toward the door. As I left, she shouted after me, calling me heartless and selfish, but I didn't look back. I'm not sure what happened after that. I blocked her on Facebook, and she never tried to reach out again. But I still think about it sometimes. How did things get that far? How could someone be so desperate and aggressive? It's one thing to ask for help, but it was the way she flipped on me that freaked me out. To this day, I have no idea if she was really a refugee or if there was something else going on. I just know I wasn't going to be the one to make that kind of decision for someone else's life. I'm all for helping people when I can, but that was way beyond my ability to help. It's a pretty messed up situation, and I can't believe it happened. I'll never forget how fast things went from a nice coffee date to me feeling like I was caught in a weird, uncomfortable trap.